Good evening, Melissa. I am very grateful that you're joining me tonight. And
Thank you.
for few people who follow me and watching my YouTube channel is Melissa Wenzel. She lives in Minnesota. And why I've chosen Melissa to interview is because I cycle year round. And when I see other women living in Winter City also cycles, I just naturally get excited. And also, we met in a winter cycling congress, which was on the 11th and 12th of February. It was online. It was very exciting congress. We learned so much. The number of cyclists in the world are increasing. Most importantly, the governments and municipalities are understanding the importance of cycling infrastructure for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing livability of the cities, and just increasing the happiness of the people of the community. So without further ado, I want to welcome Melissa Wenzel. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining. And to start, just want to let you know, just want to ask you uh, why you do what you do.
Kira, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So, I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is kind of a mixed bicycling community as far as a lot of people want to bike, a lot of people don't feel safe biking. And it's, I kind of learned my passion for advocacy just simply by wanting to bike and bike safely. So, it's something that kind of snuck up on me how much I'm passionate about biking because when I was a kid, I did bike only because I didn't have a car. It was one of those opportunities where your freedom was based on the bicycle that you rode. And in college, I couldn't afford a car and I was carless. I use that term where now I would use the term car free for when you have a choice to not have a car. But I couldn't afford a car in college and walked and biked pretty much everywhere. Um, I moved downtown. Our city center is not as populated as other city centers across the world, but I did live downtown and I lived about a 1.5 kilometers away from work. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm paying for parking at work, I'm paying for parking at home, and I'm really just basically renting a car for myself. Let's try this experiment of ditching the car. And in 2008, I sold my car and bought an e-bike. And we do have a car in our household now, and I can get to that in just a second. But I didn't realize how much more freedom I had with not owning a car. And it was wonderful. And people complain about the car breaking down and having to pay for gasoline back when it was kind of expensive, $3, $4, $5 a gallon, United States dollars, US dollars. It felt so freeing. And I'm the kind of person that I volunteer a lot. And I'm like, okay, good. This will help me put limits on what I can do and what I can volunteer for. Because I'm one of those people, yes, on a very regular basis. Yeah, you know that. You asked, and I said yes. But I love doing a lot of different things. And you know what? Not owning a car did not slow me down. Part of it is because I do own an e-bike. And so with an electric assist bicycle, I can go further than I would have without an e-bike. I have
You're
asthma.
touching, yeah, you're touching such an amazing things, Melissa, because you're mentioning about empowerment. You're
Yeah,
mentioning about perceived slowness of cycling, right? But
yeah,
I just want to tell, I'm just listening to you like, yes, Melissa, yes, because we think that cycling is somewhat inferior to a car, but actually it's not, right? We think that, cycling is slower and I won't be able to get faster to from A to Z, but actually cycling is faster because you're not stuck in the traffic. So
exactly.
it is kind of interesting that you bring this up because this is what I discovered as well. I somehow want to ask you this question like, talk about the empowerment piece because what I see is that, statistically showing that if the city can provide cycling, safe cycling for women and children, then
Mhm,
there's more women and children will cycle
absolutely.
versus like well, in some cities only men cycling because they like risk taking and women are more risk averse.
Yeah. Well, and I think here in St. Paul, we've had an increase in people bicycling, and this is even before the pandemic. But I would have coworkers who would take the bus to their work site and they would talk about getting harassed or almost getting mugged, there's actually a safety feature that I feel. So I bike primarily for transit, for commuting, and for running errands, for what somebody uses a car for. A lot of people don't drive a car for fun. You know, the concept of a Sunday afternoon drive is so antiquated, but not many people drive a car for fun. Like, just go out and go for a drive. You know, that's a novelty at best. Most people don't have the time for that. So as a bike commuter, things kind of shift a little bit. You know, people stop thinking of just the people wearing spandex and biking on Saturdays with a group of people going as fast as you can and going as far as you can. With bike commuting, things do actually kind of generalize and balance out. Now, in 2015 or before 2015, the city of St. Paul was actually looking at creating and formalizing a citywide bike plan. And it was controversial because, you know, bikes versus cars. I'm sure you, as somebody who's car free yourself, I know that you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, how can we justify paying for bike lanes when you can't even fix the roads on our street? And as a northern climate person, you get the fact that roads do need repair on a regular basis. Okay, I digress. So before 2015, an organization in St. Paul was created, Women on Bikes St. Paul. So we had a transit management organization, something that here, at least in Minnesota, but I think other cities in the United States have. It's an advocacy group. It's usually a nonprofit or non-government unit where they help promote carpooling or ride sharing primarily. Well, that's what I think anyways. But we had ours focus on women and families feeling safe on a bicycle. And in order to do that, we need to advocate for it. I remember hearing once after a bike lane went in on a road not too far from where I live now, and people are like, oh, nobody ever bikes except for like the spandex wearing folks on the weekend. And I went to my county commissioner and I'm like, how do we refute that? Because it's probably true. And he's like, well, how many times do you see a red car out your window at home? You know, you have to be staring out the window 24/7, and you're not seeing what actually happens in real life. But back to the advocacy, we realized that in order for women and families to feel safe, we needed infrastructure that is actually applicable to everybody. But by targeting that demographic of our city, it gave a voice. We had a voice that we didn't necessarily have, because the same people were showing up at city council meetings and going for group bike rides. And just even being in a group with other women and people who identify as women and with their kids and, you know, even with their spouses, it was pretty open for some of the group rides and things and activities. But it let us use our voice. This organization gave us a platform, gave us the tools that maybe others already had or others had already figured out. And even for me, who hates public speaking, which this does not feel like public speaking, I would go in front of the city hall and testify in favor of bike lanes and bike infrastructure. And I'm like, where did this person come from? The bike plan passed, and there was no funding tied to it. So it's just a piece of paper, virtually speaking. It took advocacy event after advocacy event to actually get lanes and trails and the bike infrastructure the way that we wanted it, the way that the plan indicated. And I'm very pleased to say that, especially in the last couple of years, we've had a huge increase in bike lanes and bike infrastructure, and even like temporary bike lanes in our downtown city, just to get that ball rolling. And it's so rewarding. And part of it too is that I do have other female bicyclists that are my role models, people who gave me tips and suggestions, and people who were doing it before me to help me feel comfortable and safe and help me with bike routes and stuff like that. And naturally, I ask anybody who wants advice on how to bike year round, please ask me, because I feel like that's kind of passing that, you know, paying it forward, so to speak. And I never thought I'd be a year-round bicyclist, but I am, and I'm pretty darn proud of the fact that I am. And it took other people to advocate for bike infrastructure that I now take for granted. the bike lanes and the bike paths, but people had to advocate for that, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, well, this is kind of fascinating story you're mentioning about family friendliness, right? So that's exactly a lot of mothers kind of consistently cannot understand or cannot use it because, as a mother, you have to get somewhere. You have to bring your kids and with something like you carrying lunch bags and clothing and dancing uniform. So you need like create infrastructure for families. And so
Yes.
I really want to know, it sounds like one of the success formulas, like get the family infrastructure uh, friendliness, right? And so it's very, very fascinating, your story. Well, congratulations, regardless of your kind of challenges at the beginning. Sounds like it, it seems to me it's a success story. So, in our city in Saskatoon, the same story. It's interesting, the same story. How can you afford? And, there's only 1% of people. And again, as you said, like, if you're not watching who is using the road, of course you don't know. You just kind of, yeah, because, we don't roar. Like when you're cycling, it's not noisy, so you might not be noticed. So, and I had one more thing about you mentioning, but I missed that. I lost the question. However, I just wanna let you introduce your slide that you were showing at the Winter
Yeah.
Cycling Congress. What is the story behind the slide?
Oh, so like I said, when I sold my car and bought an e-bike, I lived downtown, and I eventually met my partner David, and we bought a house about, let's see if I can do the kilometer conversion, about 15 kilometers away from my work, and getting used to biking year round and then moving someplace else and commuting back to that same spot is difficult. I took the commute hard. I moved to a part of the city that was probably the least bike friendly part of the city. So we have 7 wards, and this is the hilliest and the least populated, at least in my neighborhood. And I was really like starting to regret that we bought the house that we bought because of my commute. And of course, people are like, "Well, you could just buy a car." I'm like, "No, that's not an option." Yes, it is. I know it is, but not for me. Those kind of things are like challenges of, nope, you got to figure this out, kiddo. I'm telling myself this. And we also had some really major road construction. So part of it was just kind of a perfect storm for bad commuting. So I eventually got into my rhythm of commuting and found some workarounds. We have a river in the way, we have freeways, we have railroad tracks. So getting around town sometimes is a bit of a challenge, but I figured it out. And I was really, really excited to try to bike year round from a farther distance. And for me, biking that far round trip is quite a bit. I have asthma, I have arthritis, and that's primarily why I have my e-bike or why I got it. And, throwing winter conditions where, it can get 40 below, which I believe Fahrenheit and Celsius is the same temperature, if I remember hearing correctly from the Winter Cycling Congress. People were bragging about what the coldest spot was for people going there. I was a little trepidatious about biking in the winter. I don't love winter. It's never been my favorite season. And I mentioned at the Winter Cycling Congress that I had cancer, leukemia, 14 years ago, and those were some pretty dark days. And it happened where most of my treatment, the majority of my concentrated treatment, was in the wintertime. And so, I kind of have a little bit of flashback every winter to those tough days. And the winter after we moved here, I'm just like, oh, I'm struggling with winter more than usual. So, but I like to bike. What can I do to kind of combine some of those issues simultaneously? And I took the 30 days of biking concept, which actually is global now, mostly, I think. And it originated in Minneapolis, Minnesota, our neighboring city. And I decided to bike for 30 days in January. And out of town for a weekend, so I couldn't get one bike ride in. I really tried that day too, but I biked 30 out of 31 days in 2018 in January. And it was an experiment and it was tough. It was also some of the most amazing biking I've ever done. And I found a whole bunch of other people that bike year round that I didn't know. And because I started to blog about it, we have a local online forum called Streets MN, and I wrote about it. And we're actually still doing this on a yearly basis. A bunch of us are still biking 30, 31 days in January. Some people bike every day, literally. They'll say, you know, I've been biking for 1,000 days straight. And I'm like, yeah, that's not me. But it was a self-challenge just to see if I could do it. And I don't give myself a lot of challenges like specific, prescriptive, but that was a really good one. And, you know, it's tough figuring out what the layers are. It's really tough to, when you wear the wrong thing, keeping going on that bike ride. But the things that I really have learned so much about myself are through those tough situations. And not only did I grow as a person, I connected with so many other people, men and women. I mean, I'd get kudos every time I'd show up at work with my, you know, bike helmet and ski goggles and all that. People are just like, "How do you do it?" And I'm like, "I just do it. I don't really think about it." You know, it takes planning and being careful with temperatures and snow and ice, and I have studded tires. But beyond that, you just do it. You figure out what works. You adapt when things aren't working great, like bringing more layers, or I even bring some emergency protein bars with me just in case I get stuck somewhere, and you know, just having a backup plan and all that.
Did you get stuck?
There was, I don't remember if it was that year, but there was one particularly bad snowstorm where the snow started really quickly mid-afternoon, and like 4 to 6 inches fell between like 2 p.m. and 5:30, 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And I had to walk my bike partially home and bike it home too. And it took 2 hours. A normal commute was about 25 minutes. And it took me just a little under 2 hours to get home. And I was pretty darn proud that I made it, because there were cars stuck in the ditches left and right. But I made it. And I helped push a car out.
Wow.
They were stuck on a slick spot, and I was able to push them out. And I was walking up that hill because I couldn't get any traction either. So
Yeah, yeah, cool. I did that too this summer. This winter, November 9th, we had huge snowstorm, and then so much snow, and then one guy was stuck. So I was biking, like, okay, do you want my help? So I'm like, I can help. So I help. So I have 2 questions for you. So do you know your number of, economically how much you save by biking? And also, I think one more question I want to ask is that how can I personally encourage other professional women to try this out? Because every time I say I cycle year round, I literally see square eyes and like, you must be crazy, right? And I know I'm not crazy. So
Right.
what would you recommend and suggest?
Remind me your first question again.
The first question was like, what was your number, like economically, how much you save?
You know, we do have a car in the household, and so, you know, we have an electric vehicle, so we're 100% electric, me with my bike and him with his car. So it's been so long, to the point where, you know, once you start saving so much money because you don't have a car, you spend it somewhere else. So I don't know the dollar amount, but I do know that there are figures that with a decent nice used car, or a fairly affordable new car, that you save about $7,000 a year, I think, if you don't own a car. And think about that every single year. And I think it's actually a little bit more than that, but I just wanted to kind of make it a little bit on the low side. But with insurance and maintenance and gas and oil changes and all those things, plus the car loan, presumably, $7,000 a year. And just 10 years later, that's $70,000. And it does impress upon me when I see people who can't afford a car or maybe even a bike, and they take the bus. But the bus routes are limiting, and they can only go where the bus goes. I do have a friend who actually tallied it up that she has an e-bike and doesn't have a car, and she did acknowledge that she spent more on clothing because, again, as a winter cyclist, you do have to pay a little bit more for the studded tires or a fat tire bike. But again, you have so much more freedom with the financial side of things. You can afford to buy really good tires if you don't own a car. As far as now, I'm blanking on the second question, even though I was really excited
How
to answer
to
that.
how to encourage other professional women to
Yeah,
join to cycle and empower themselves, like physically, materialistically, and spiritually, right? Like it's such an empowerment.
I am so grateful that I had kind of a small system, a small network of people that already winter biked and that were women, that are women. And I work in an environmental state agency, so that was, there's a bit of that sort of mentality. But we even find that the last commuter survey we conducted about 5 years ago, almost 90% of my coworkers drive a car solo to work in St. Paul, Minnesota, where we have bike infrastructure and buses and a couple train lines. We're just in a part of town that's a little bit less bike friendly, but that doesn't mean people can't carpool, whatever. I think that there are people who bike and people just don't know it. People don't go out and brag about, hey, guess what? I bike to work. I mean, it's just people just do it because it's a part of their lives. And one thing that's always been something that was taught to me by others and something that I encourage others is to be a bike buddy for someone else.
Mm.
Because that concept of even riding the bus for the first time when you're a kid or an adult in a new city, having somebody to do something with you takes that mysterious, I don't know what is going to happen, that unknown, where the fear of the unknown is much, much bigger or much, much more impactful than the actual trying something new and realizing that you're going to enjoy it. And so we actually have a series of bike buddies at our state agency, and it's something that I promote on social media. If you ever, want to try an e-bike or bike on this particular trail, let me know and I'll be happy to bike with you. And just even knowing that people are available to bike with you actually probably reduces the stress. I know it does for me if I've never been on a specific part of town or on a trail that I've never been on. And because I bike for commuting and for transit, I don't bike in groups and with people on a regular basis, especially during the pandemic. But it's still one thing that I would just hands down without question be willing to go for a bike ride with somebody who's trying to figure it out. And as far as winter biking, my general advice is just the same advice that I got when I was learning how to drive a car is, go to an empty parking lot in the middle of winter and test drive around the parking lot and see what happens. And one piece of advice is a really good one is you have to learn how to fall, because you're going to fall in the winter on a bike, and how you fall and how you can protect yourself from hurting yourself is really important. And just being able to be adaptable to the different climates, but different weather conditions. But I think, there's not a lot of great things that happened because of the pandemic, but I like to say that 2020 was the year of bikes and bicycling, and every bike shop around me cannot keep bikes in stock, cannot keep the parts in stock. My bike shop actually had to close because they have 2 locations and they couldn't keep parts for 2 different stores. So they actually consolidated because there's so much demand. Who closes because there's too much demand? But it makes a lot of sense now that I heard it like that. I know that there are probably people that are listening to this that are probably in smaller cities, and just know that, again, somebody had to pave the way for me to be able to bike on bike lanes. So you might have to be that person that is going to be leading by example, by taking charge. But just know that maybe in the United States and Canada, we're kind of an anomaly. A lot of countries really support year-round biking to the point where we feel so inferior to those countries.
I
And
know, I know,
around the world, women are biking every day in the
I know.
winter, colder climates than us. And so if you don't specifically know somebody who bikes in the winter, you're hearing from two people who do, and two people
Yeah,
who bike year round, and two people who live in a city and don't have a car. And if you don't know anybody in your community who bikes that looks like you know, your demographics, just know that they exist around the world. And so we can kind of feel that solidarity sister mentality. And again, today was a gorgeous day. It was about 8 degrees Celsius. It was one of the warmest days in a really long time. And I biked to donate platelets, something that's really important for me to do. And I'll admit I'm a little tired because it's I don't remember the conversion to kilometers, but it's about a 30-mile round trip. So 50 kilometers. And I'm tired. But today was a gorgeous day and dozens of people biking, men, women, families, kids. It was just wonderful to see. And that's something I'm really actually taking for granted now because it's actually becoming really popular and really commonplace. But it's still February, it's still winter. It doesn't, it's not like it's springtime and everybody's instantly outdoors, but because it was such a gorgeous day after a lot of cold weather, it was wonderful to see, and bicyclists waving to each other. And it was, yeah, there are more people biking than people realize. Even people who do bike, you don't know who's biking. It's not like, you see a big parking lot filled with, cars. That's really, really obvious. But people are biking every day, year round. And one of the times that I was behind that bus where it has the 30 days of biking, I'm on a bike lane where you can see bike tread in the snow. You can see that there are bike tracks. And I don't know who those people are. I've probably never met them, but they biked before me those days when I'm going to work. And so that alone gives me solidarity, knowing that somebody else already biked that day in the snow, in the wintertime. So you're never alone. I just feel like
it's,
I'm just never alone in a good, non-creepy way.
I
Just
know
realized how.
that's so nice. Like, I feel that solidarity piece that you're saying. That when I previously, because of the infrastructure is not friendly yet and all that stuff. I mean, it's changing, but I used to be
Yeah,
like, oh, Europe, Europe got this, and how come we don't have this? So I had this kind of kind of negative resentment towards the infrastructure not being friendly. But now I realize, okay, I can focus on positivity, and every time I see a cycling person, I'm like, thank you so much. And especially if I see women cycle, like, oh my God, thank you so much. So anyway, it is changing absolutely. And then internet is like a blessing that we can connect with other people from other part of the world and kind of validate that what we want is not just selfish, stupid thing. It's for the public, for families, for women to empower and
yep,
just we know the fact that women earn less than men, right?
right,
And
right,
then that's the piece, like, instead of getting frustrated what you cannot change, you better like reduce your own expenses and become more powerful. So
right.
yeah, it is like when I was at the congress, Winter City Congress, I never thought that I would see cycling as a diversity and inclusion point, but then listening to other people, like, oh my God, it is diversity and inclusion. It is about gender issue. It is about women empowerment. It is about family friendliness, and environmental stuff was always there. But yeah, it is quite a empowering thing to charging this, and I'm doing my best to do in my own city. However, like as you said, we are not alone. So that's why to conclude our session, Melissa, I'm so, so proud of you. So happy that we are connected. And I'm looking forward, maybe one day we will meet in some winter cycling congress and celebrate and drink some beer sometimes. And so, any parting words for me, for everybody who listens to this? And we'll close then.
Absolutely. Again, it's one of those topics that I love talking about. And And again, I appreciate your kind words, and I do it just because I want to give myself an opportunity to live my values, to be able to represent the place that I work with my commuting choice, to represent to other women. Like I bike in the winter so that other people, and I bike on fairly residential roads, but with a somewhat dense population on my way to downtown St. Paul. And if I'm really frustrated about my commute, I just remember, look, you're doing this because you want to make sure other people see women biking in the winter. I have a blinky helmet so people can see me. It even has turn signals in it. I signal every single turn. I stop for every stoplight and stop sign. We actually took an oath that we would follow the rules of the road when we joined this Women on Bikes group, and it was one of those things where it's like, I feel like I'm a role model. I feel like people are watching me, partly because my bike is very recognizable, as well as my helmet and my jacket. But I really want others to feel comfortable biking. And so sometimes when the commute is really tough and I want to give up, I remember that I'm doing this not only for myself, but to show others that women do this. And I live really close to a large population of Somali immigrants. And I helped give away some bikes. There was a free bike giveaway, and that happens in a couple cities here in Minnesota from time to time, helping them pick out the right bike and getting a bike helmet, getting their helmet situated on their head, and seeing those little boys and girls now biking in the neighborhood is just, it makes those tough days just almost disappear. And I've been told once, and I don't know if this is how it was said to me, but there's something about social justice with bicycling, that being able to have that ability to bike safely, to bike without harassment. As an advocate, you're advocating for other people to have the same freedom and to be able to bike. And there is a lot of freedom to being able to be a bike owner and not a car owner. And so for people of color, they get harassed in a car, on a bike, whatever. But advocating for good bike infrastructure does help the whole community. You're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking for the safety and functionality of the entire city. And when I bike, I take a car off the road. But when I bike, I'm showing other people that this is a normal way to commute. It's not alternative. It's my normal. It is normal for millions of people across the world.
Yeah. And, before I let you go, I think you mentioned such an important piece, right? Like it is more than just me commuting. It is wanting other people to be liberated, included, and empowered. So thank you so much, Melissa, and hope to see you sometimes in person. And on that note, I'll say bye. And thank you so much, and hope to see you in person. And also, all the best in your volunteering. And I think St. Paul is extremely, extremely lucky to have you. And thank you so much. Thank you so much.